So my name is Annie, as Julia has mentioned already. Thank you all for tuning in today. So before I get started on my talk, I just want to do a quick background about me. So I did my undergrad in biology at McGill, and I graduated from the BMC program in 2018. So I was in an interactive stream, and I totally thought that I would go on and become a UX designer and create some awesome designs and applications. That would be really fun learning experiences on really complicated scientific topics for science students, patients, or healthcare providers. But that's obviously not what happened. I stumbled upon Coactuate, which is where I am now. And what I saw there really captured my interest. So Coactuate is a strategic design consultancy that's obsessed with helping healthcare organizations innovate and grow. So at Coactuate, we take a design approach to solving problems, and we're getting basically input from both the exec level and the healthcare provider and patient level, and then we work with them to iterate on solutions. So ultimately, our solutions can then be implemented and have buy-in from everyone. So I know that might not mean very much to people. I don't think I fully understood what I was getting into 3 years ago. So I wanted to take the opportunity today to sort of bring that to life for everyone and sort of like shed a little light into my work at Coactuate. So how I wanted to frame this talk is around the problems that our clients face and what made it a really wicked problem, and do a bit of a show and tell of how my team and I worked through this wicked problem, and how some other BMCers, myself included, on this project was able to scale our BMC skill set to really big, multi-dimensional, ambiguous problems. Basically, how does strategy, design, and storytelling come together to solve problems at a systems level? And how does that ultimately impact patients and advanced science? Okay, so what is a wicked problem and what makes strategy so wicked? Before I get into that, let me first define strategy. I think strategy is one of those words that everyone kind of knows the definition of, but actually has a slightly different take on it. So for me, strategy is a blueprint of decisions that an organization or team makes. It sets the direction. It also guides critical decisions and outline what the organization is committing to and how are they going to evaluate success. So you can imagine in a really complex dynamic world such as healthcare, that's also really competitive and involves so many people, you need to make the right decisions and address the unmet needs of the patient and the provider. Now, what is a wicked problem? It's not because the problem is challenging, but rather it takes a very unconventional process to resolve them. Think of something like poverty and climate change. Those are really classic examples of wicked problems. So in strategy, there are 5 characteristics that would make it really wicked. The first one is that the problem involves many stakeholders with different values and priorities. The roots of the issue are complex and tangled. So basically what this means is it's not really clear that there's a single root cause that the organization can just solve for. 3, the problem is difficult to come to grips with and changes with every attempt to address it. So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity, and you never know what's actually really going to solve the problem. The challenge has no precedent, and there's nothing to indicate the right answer to the problem. And the answer, like I said earlier, it might change as you learn more information. So at Coactuate, we had a client that came to us and basically asked, what treatment should we clinically develop in this disease space? So to put this into context, this is what's at stake for big pharma. Usually it's around $2 billion per clinical development program. It takes 8 to 10 years from conception to product launch. And only 1 out of 40 drug candidates actually makes it to the market. So you can imagine these organizations are dropping massive amounts of money into research that will take years before there's any results or proof that something is actually effective. And there's a huge failure rate. So the stakes are really big, which means that they need to make the right decisions, especially for the patients that they are serving. So that's very complicated. But on top of that, our client that came to us, they had a really wicked problem. So they were a top 10 pharma company that wanted to be a global leader in curing an infectious disease with high unmet need worldwide. And what I mean by unmet need is that there was basically no complete cure, and that's what was driving everything. So if I go by the defining characteristics of a wicked problem, both internally and externally, this involved a lot of people. So for the patients, the providers, and the payers, there was a lot of differing country-specific needs and definitions of what treatment success looks like. So what would be accepted in North America would not have uptake in Europe or Asia. Also, the client team had consisted of a lot of different roles. There's scientific researchers, there's clinical researchers, there's commercial, people from commercial, marketing who are dealing with partnering, and they all have different perspectives and beliefs. Also, the science was really, really complicated. There was a huge competitive landscape, over 50 companies that were all trying to research the science, and they were all looking at different MOAs. The scientific hypothesis is that the cure would require a combination treatment. So you can imagine how many combinations that these companies would have to try to sort of experiment with to get even a little bit of data to show that something is working. So our client team couldn't see the market. There was just too much going on. And the teams were working in silos, and they were not really sharing a single view of what the planning context was. Also, there was a lot of new data that was emerging that was challenging the existing scientific hypothesis. So it was constantly changing. The team is basically planning in a very uncertain market. And also, like I said earlier, there was no cure. And what's even more complicated is that the scientific community couldn't even define what a successful outcome is. Is it a certain drop in biomarker? Is it a complete drop in biomarker? Nobody really aligned on a singular view. And because there was no cure, that means the regulatory pathway, the treatment guideline, all the infrastructure was not in place globally. And lastly, the research is still early. There's no clear data to inform the decision for which treatment approach would be the most effective. Nobody knows what combination is actually going to be most effective. So this is really, really complicated. How can we possibly make decisions about what we're going to pursue, given that there's such a lack of clarity in the science and in the competitive landscape? So at a high level, there's 3 things that our team did. We worked with our clients to build a shared understanding of the problem, define a strategic vision. So what is the future we want to build? How do we want to advance the science? What hypothesis do we want to put a stake into the ground and say that this is what we believe and this is therefore what we're going to really explore? And lastly, focus on action and impact. What are the scenarios? What are the options? What might change in the future that we need to be aware of? And therefore, how do we pivot once those things happen? So now I'm going to sort of do a deep dive and walk through and show a couple of things that we did within those 3 processes. We actually spend the most time at this stage of a project to try to build a shared understanding of the problem with our client. So, if we think back to how many people this would involve, the patient providers in different countries, the client teams that are involved in all the different MOA research, the scientific community also has very different beliefs of what would achieve cure. Whatever choice that the company makes will have an implication for all those stakeholders. So it's really important that we involved them and document opinions and be really thoughtful in communication. So the process that we took here is that we synthesized a lot of information to paint a really comprehensive picture of the treatment and competitive landscape. So kind of like what I have showing here is a situation analysis. So, but on top of that, not only did we build a lot of communication tools, but we also involved our client teams and researchers from the start. So we had lots of interviews with all the relevant stakeholders from different teams, So whether it was partnering, clinical development, or from multiple countries, so across North America and Europe and Asia, and basically brought them together, collected information, tried to understand all the different perspectives and the beliefs, and build this very comprehensive understanding of the planning context. And then we start to sort of like refine a little bit and think about what are the internal and external scenarios. And I'll get to this in a little bit. But basically, what are the what ifs? Like, what if this happens? And what does that mean for our client team? So what I've realized in this project, but also in many of my other projects at Coactuate, is that visualization doesn't just stop at being an educational piece. It wasn't like I built these beautiful materials for the client and hope that they, and then give it to them and hope that they understand the problem, right? So what we were doing was that we were using these visualizations to support our conversations with them, and iterating on these with our clients from the start actually pushed their thinking. So by translating the complexity of the science and the competitive landscape, we revealed gaps and insights that the client didn't even realize. So I'm going to share a couple of stories. So for example, one of the things we built for our conversations with them was this really cool overview of the competitive landscape. So they came in thinking that they were the leader in this science. You know, they're exploring the right MOA, they're exploring the right combinations, etc. But by showing them what others were doing and what was in other companies' pipeline, they realized that they weren't the leader. So they were able to sort of see, based on this sort of visualization, that what the science other companies believed in and how they were collaborating and how they were sharing the risk. So our clients thought that they were just going to like develop everything by themselves. And by actually seeing some of the collaborations that were happening, they came to realize that their approach is not the best approach, and that there was a potential for a lot of failures and that they're not moving fast enough. So this really helped our clients see the whole landscape and see how others are exploring the science, so that it can inform how they want to explore the science and the different scenarios that they need to consider. Another visualization that helped provide a lot of clarity was this very complicated landscape with a comprehensive timeline. So our clients didn't even like stack up their own development program, so they couldn't see what they were actually doing and how all the timing was working out. They didn't know when the big decision points were. And so therefore, it's hard for them to say like, okay, we need to make a decision at this time point. And you can see that in a clinical development, it takes years and years and years to get data readouts and to figure things out. So even just from a science standpoint, you can imagine if another company or even your own program was exploring a certain combinatorial approach and did a data readout, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, you need to make a decision. And that's what our clients really needed to see from a very systems perspective, a very big picture perspective. So they can know like, okay, so at this time and point, I need to make a decision right now, and then therefore either accelerate or pause or cancel certain programs and reevaluate our scientific hypothesis. So our clients need to understand the landscape, but they also need to understand what they want to pursue as an organization. So you think that getting a company and everyone to align on a single vision is easy, but it's actually really, really difficult. Think about all the different teams are involved and what their beliefs are. If they don't have the conversation together on what they're trying to accomplish at a big picture, you can't really move and make decisions as one singular company that is cohesive in an effective way. So we really need to bring everyone together and look at the big picture and see how that affects the company approaches research and the timing of the research. So we did all that work upfront to understand the scientific hypotheses, the landscape, the competitors, and now we need to sort of take a step back and decide the direction that we want to go and sort of like decide this is our focus and this is our priority based on all the work we did with them up front. So we got to sort of like push them and bring them together and align on this one vision. So best in disease combination therapy, curing infectious disease X. So what does best in disease mean? It means from a decision standpoint, it means that they need to sort of like explore new endpoints, multiple MOAs, maybe look into biomarkers and really long-term clinical trials like registries to sort of understand what doesn't exist today. So they really put a stake in the ground and said, we're going to pursue the science. And then therefore we also have to be efficient given the constantly changing landscape. So the last part is really about focusing on action and impact. So we're changing the way people think through designing an active engagement that ultimately help them make the right decisions. So thinking back around all the work we did up front, we continue to pull that through. We can really design a very immersive and methodical approach, a workshop approach, that helps structure our clients' thinking and force them to get into the mindset of their patients and providers, the competitors, and brainstorm together to align on the priorities, the success criteria, and the actions. So, a couple of ways we can do that is we can ask really good questions that are going to provoke them and that is future oriented. So here's a little bit of a mock-up of like what a in-person workshop would look like. We're really putting them in the context of like, what if you were the competitors? How about in the future? What would you want your how would you want to be on the Time magazine or Nature or Scientific American when it comes to the science, right? So we're really putting that in that situation. And I just want to highlight one of the cool activities that we designed. So if you'll remember earlier in the project, we were thinking through the planning context, right? And we even refined some what if scenarios. So for example, what if there are changes in the scientific hypotheses? What if an internal lead asset fails? And what if the competitor molecule is better? So based on one what if scenario, what are the possible actions that we can take given these scenarios, and what are the pros and cons? And then let's think about what are the consequences of this action? What does that mean for our company? What kind of data informs our decision to take this action? And then we have to evaluate, given all these possible actions, what are the ones we will take and what are the triggers? So great. They went through that whole process and defined a strategy and the hypothesis that they believe in and therefore decisions that they have to make. But how do they even communicate their strategy to stakeholders and their leadership team? Again, this comes back to building communication, building that story, that narrative, and the visualization. We put a lot of effort into building this overarching story that is very clear in terms of the rationale. That can then be shared with internal stakeholders to support onboarding and buy-in so that our client team can be successful. So basically, you can sort of see it, but I couldn't show it in full detail, but these are we have some really cool decision trees that basically said, if this happens, if this data readout happens, this is what we're going to do. And then we also had a really high level roadmap of the actions that the client team wanted to take. So what are they going to be actively advancing in terms of their own clinical portfolio, but also what science are they going to proactively explore, and what are some contingency plans given certain data readouts? So wicked problems are obviously really hard to understand, and they're very complex, and even the most expert people have a hard time seeing it. Throughout the entire process, we've really engaged with all the different stakeholders, and it's really complicated, and it's not like we found that they're not always aligned on singular definitions of success, on even the scientific hypotheses, and even just understanding the whole landscape. Throughout these three high-level processes, we realized, like, as BMCers, we are kind of the cornerstone. We're trained to sort of translate that complexity, and we can do this at a very systems level and bring together the science, the communication, the strategy, and the design thinking to help people see the science and the opportunities and how that connects to people's lives and therefore makes decisions. And that's really, really valuable. So that basically concludes my talk. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm now open for any questions.
Thanks, Annie. That was a great presentation. It was a super interesting case study too, and it's really neat to see how BMC skill sets can be applied in so many different ways. If anybody in the audience has questions, feel free to raise your hand or write into the chat. Oh, Jenny.
Hello. Annie, thank you again. That was really a great presentation. I was quite amazed by the level of detail that you were able to show us here. And I was also quite amazed by almost like the scale of this project. It really felt like an enormous project, really. And so I think a question that the size of this project really brought up was also how was the outcome of your learnings socialized in your pharma clients company? Because working with pharma company, it seems like a lot of the times every team does work in silo, but because of the broadness of this project, it feels like it would really need alignment of many teams from the client side to really implement the awesome strategies and the learnings. So I'm curious about what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think what I really want to highlight is that through the process of this project, we're actually building the alignment with the teams already. By doing these interviews and like even the workshop is actually it's not necessarily just to select people, it's sometimes like even the team leads within the client that we bring together and sort of like create that opportunity for conversation and for them to sort of like share their perspective, share their expertise, and make the decision together. So a lot of times I think not just with this project in particular, but also a lot of them are my other projects that I've been part of. It really takes like you working with the client throughout the entire process. And it's like those conversations that really help the teams sort of see like, oh, okay, this is what I need to do. And then so there's that particular bit, but also, you know, we have maybe, for example, that strategy roadmap that they then take to leadership, right? So because the teams are aligned to what the decisions are, and we've made a roadmap where it tells a very compelling story of like, this is what we chose to pursue and this is why. It kind of just like helps with the communication within the teams, but also like with leadership, so that everyone is sort of like on the same track. So it really comes down to like the collaboration aspect of things that really needs to happen, not just like, oh, one person decides on something and another person decides on something and then somehow you make something together, but like it's actually the process that we take with the clients that help them come together. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Fantastic presentation, Annie. It's always a delight to hear you talk and interesting to see how you're doing things. You talked, this sort of goes off of Jenny's question, but you talked about how useful this was for the pharma company and how they realized things that they really didn't know. So I think it speaks to the value of this approach, the value of the work that you do. But what was their initial buy-in like? I'm just curious because it is something that doesn't always seem valuable. Clients might not trust the process. And so what was that experience like in terms of onboarding them and making sure that they understood the value of it as well?
Okay, that's an interesting question as well. I think there's something we do in the beginning, which is really making sure that we as the consultants are speaking the same language as our clients. So sometimes we'll and like also like having a shared understanding of the objectives. So we spend a lot of time up front just aligning on like, okay, what are we really trying to achieve with this project? Because sometimes they do, like you said, like they come in and they're not really sure what they want, or they're not even sure like, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? It's not like they came in being like, yeah, we want decision trees and know what actions we want to take, and or even like, oh, we already believe we're the best, right? But they come to us at least with knowing that there's a problem they want to solve. So we work with them a lot in the beginning to really sort of like dig in on exactly what is the root problem and try to understand their side of things and sort of like speak like the same language as them, and to make sure that we are kind of like having the same objectives. Everyone comes together and aligns on that specific objective, which makes the rest of the process smoother, or like it's kind of like a iterative process. So I think that's how we basically create that buy-in. Just like we focus on a lot of that in the start.